Hey friends, I'm Teresa Morris and welcome to Friends Talking Education. Please go out to Apple iTunes and rate the show. The more ratings we receive, the easier it is to find our podcast. Today, friends, we have with us Candace Curry-Williams, classroom teacher, curriculum resource teacher, business owner, and mother of three, ages 10, 7, and 3. And we will be talking today about how do I get it all done? Welcome, Candace.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So today's topic, we're talking about how do I get it all done?
How do I get it all done? They keep coming at me, giving me more.
And that's what we're going to talk about because as teachers, they keep coming at me and giving me more. But first, let us find out a little bit about Candace. What initiated your love of learning and education?
For me, I believe it started when I was 5, just playing school every single weekend. I was always a teacher. My sister did not get to ever be the teacher. Well, that's not true. She got to be the teacher a couple of times, but I usually took that over.
Because she wasn't teaching right?
She wasn't teaching right. It started there. I come from a family of educators, grew up going to classrooms and just watching people teach. So I knew from a very young age, you ask kids in kindergarten, what do they want to be? For me, it was always a teacher. And when I got to college, then I decided that I actually wanted to pursue that career and to actually work with students through subbing. I decided middle school was my niche. That's where I like to be. And so ever since then, I've been working in middle school classrooms.
Going into the classrooms with your family members, what did you see that made you fall in love with the whole teaching aspect?
I saw their love of teaching. They were sincerely enjoying themselves. My family, and it didn't matter who you were with, mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, everyone was educating everywhere they went. My granddad on my dad's side was a minister, so he was teaching in his own way. My grandmother was a paraprofessional, so she was teaching. All of my uncles were teaching. That's just what we do. So I saw just joy in the classrooms. And then to see the reception from students back toward what they were doing just made it even more exciting for me. So,
did you see the stress of
I
the teaching?
I didn't. I actually don't recall. I actually do not recall, but I remember going to my mom's classroom. She was teaching 4th grade and running a small group with flashcards. And the principal walked in and was like, wow, she's doing a great job. But I was working on math facts with those kids. I had to, at that time, be in the 6th grade doing that. I loved that.
What is your time management system?
So my time management system, I try and think about how we have 24 hours in a day. Everyone has 24 hours in a day. So when I'm in the building, I have 8 hours to get done what I need to get done. And sometimes that means planning down to the minute. Even setting up, I try to go in the day knowing what my goal is, my to-do list. These are the things that I'm trying to accomplish and giving those tasks times associated with them. For example, if I come in at 7 o'clock to 7:15 is just kind of like that warm-up time, so to speak. It's just kind of settling in, getting everything set up, looking over your to-do list, making sure you've got everything prioritized. Sometimes in that 15 minutes that you come in, new things are added to that list, so you have to find a way to add it by priority. Is this top priority or can I put it lower on my list? So just planning it down to the minute.
How do you organize your classroom schedule?
So in the classroom, I try to make everything very plug and play. And that came from a time where I was a classroom teacher. I had just become a team leader. And then midway through the year, I also became like a department chair. So now it was no longer just focusing on the events that were happening in my classroom. I also had to spend that 8-hour time helping the teachers around me, my coworkers. It meant me becoming really, really vigilant and in a sense stingy with my time, being willing to say no.
Stingy with your time.
Yes, stingy with my time. I think in my personality, I have to say stingy because I feel that that's what I'm doing when I tell people no. Like, no, I cannot help you right now with that. And so just really, again, having that to-do list. I had to take care of my classroom first before I could help anyone else. Because if I was backed up in what I needed to do, there's no way I was going to be able to help anyone else effectively.
Walk us through a day in the class of Miss Curry-Williams.
All of my classes start with a do now. During that do now time, 5 to 7 minutes, that is my time to do what I need to do as a teacher, kind of set up for the day. While they're working, I'm taking attendance. If there's any quick paperwork that needs to be done, I can take care of that. I might take a glance at my email, not to respond, but sometimes you get messages and things that you just need to be aware of. So we start with the do now. I do a mini lesson.
And then your mini lesson, how long is your mini lesson?
10 to 15 minutes. 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll roll into our guided practice. So that's when we are practicing together as a class, or sometimes I even have the students to collaborate. Then they'll go into working independently, and during that independent time is when I'll pull small groups. But I love operating my classroom in groups. It's the easiest way for me to plug and play all of the things that administration may try to throw my direction in the classroom.
Small groups in a middle school classroom.
Small groups in a middle school classroom, yes.
What does that look like?
So I have a teacher-led center. That's where I can get my differentiation done. Especially with language arts, you have students who are all over as far as what they know and what they're ready to learn next. Starting off with my teacher-led, I have a vocabulary station, writing stations, technology, and I've been able to kind of differentiate out each of those centers to meet the needs of all the students.
During the do now, you may complete a little bit of paperwork if it's easy to complete. As a teacher, we do have a lot of paperwork that we have to tend to.
Yes.
On a regular basis, documentation of accommodations for students. If you are providing that accommodation for a student to meet the educational plan of that student, how do you, or when do you complete the paperwork to show that you provided the accommodation or the modification for that student?
I think that just depends on what type of paperwork it is. So the school that I'm at, we had 504 logs. It goes back to that organizational piece. So I organized the 504 logs by class period so that it was easier for me to get to. I only touched those logs either during the do now for the previous class period or after school. So if I noticed that someone was denying their accommodation, I might go make a quick note as students are transitioning from one class to the next. If there was something that I noticed that I wanted to take to our staffing specialist, then I would make that note during that time. But something very small that wasn't going to take me longer than 5 to 7 minutes, because that was all that I had for that time. So 504 logs, typically, if I need to make a quick note, would happen in the beginning of class. And then the rest of it I would take after school.
I keep a little notebook.
Yes.
And so I walk around with my little notebook, and then when things hit me, I pull out my notebook and I quickly will write down something. Do you have a strategy, or do you use a strategy like that as well?
I do. So I have a notebook, but I don't carry it around with me because I'm really good for setting things down and not knowing where they are after that. So I did keep a notebook, but my notebook was more so for ideas. And I used that notebook over my break. So sometimes, you're driving in your car. I think my best ideas come when I'm driving in the car or practicing my lesson in the shower. Yes. So sometimes, you hop out and you're like, that is a great idea. I want to write that down. Like for one of my stations, I might come up with an idea or a different way. Sometimes, you're working with a student, you can't figure out like, what else can I do for this student? They're not getting it any way that I've given it to them. So I had more of an idea notebook, and during my break, so Christmas break, summer break, things of that nature, I could go back to that notebook to kind of take care of those ideas and tasks and help them come to fruition. But walking around the classroom with a notebook wasn't necessarily what I did. I did have a clipboard at one point that I was working with, but again, I set things down. So
It is very important to have a work-life balance. What are you letting go of?
I'm letting go of being chained to a job. I think that feeling like you have so much to do as a teacher is what burns us out. We know that administration, sometimes it feels like they're just sitting in their office thinking up what is the next thing that I can tell these teachers that they have to do. And how can I make it so that it is so impossible for them to do? Letting go of feeling like I had to be working all the time. And that's when, like, when your back is against the wall and you have all these things that need to be done, there are people who say enough and they either leave the profession altogether, right, or the people who say enough, let me figure out how to get it all done. Right. I'll be the first to tell you, I'm a master procrastinator. So that's kind of where, figuring out how to get it all done came from, because I would wait until everything was due. And then you're overwhelmed now. So now, because I'm overwhelmed and I have all these things that are due right now, I'm not teaching effectively because my mind is on the millions of tasks that I've been putting off up until this point that I need to get done. Right. I have a teacher knocking on my door who's asking for help. The principal just came to me and said, we have a new teacher. She wants me to mentor them and sit with them. But I know that I have to get my grade book done. My lesson plans aren't in. I'm getting emails about, hey, your lesson plan wasn't turned in on time. So I just had to figure out a way. How could I maximize the time that I was in the building so that I wasn't taking so much time away from my family? Because I think those of us who really love what we do, we will work hours upon hours for the students in our classroom if it means that we are helping them grow and change and become and do better. But while I was spending all this time with other people's children, I was taken away from my own family and sincerely myself.
That is quite important when it comes to teachers, because we do tend to think about the students that sit in front of us and how we have to meet their needs, but then we put our own needs on the back burner. And then it gets to a point where you're at a crisis point yes. and your mental health, and you say, I need to take a mental health day, but I can't take a mental health day because I need to be here for the kids. And then you go into this vicious cycle that is not healthy for us. That was the point I decided something had to give.
Something has to give. Yes. And sometimes it comes down to talking to those teachers who have come before you, finding those teachers that seem to have it all down. I'll be the first to tell you, we don't have it all down. Even I don't have it all down. In conversations sometimes with people, if you're noticing that, man, how is it that they're leaving here every day at 3:30? You know what I mean? And they have everything done. Everything is done. No one's coming after them. You kind of know who's doing well, who's not doing well in the building. Kind of partnering up with those master teachers and having them mentor you and just being open to what it is that they have to say.
Okay, so let's be real.
Let's be real.
Do you still take work home?
I do from time to time. Now, if I'm taking massive loads of work home, that's typically because, again, I have procrastinated and it's come down to the wire. I do not take as much home now as I did as a beginning teacher. And that just came from learning, different tips and trick, grading one class's assignment or emailing parents back who had, sent emails about their student, or making those positive phone calls home. I know a lot of teachers have a hard time figuring out, how am I supposed to contact 150 kids' parents right. in a quarter? But I looked for times even in class, especially with positive phone calls home.
Oh, great time.
As soon as it happens, I want to call the parent while it's fresh on my mind. Again, sometimes you have to be willing to say no.
And be stingy with your time.
Or make people walk with you. That was another thing that I learned. Sometimes people catch you in the hallway as you're walking to go make copies, or you're running to the restroom because this is the only time that you have to go. And they say, oh, can I ask you a question really quick? And, you can say yes if you can walk with me. Right. And then depending on what they say, then you can either answer their question, or sometimes you have to say, hey, that's a great question. I have something I want to show you, but email me to remind me and I'll get back to you. And then that task now goes on my to-do list, but not necessarily for that day.
As a teacher working towards becoming a master teacher, what steps did you take to build your teacher toolbox?
That is actually a great question. I don't think people realize you have to have a teacher toolbox in order to survive. After my first year of teaching and that overwhelmed feeling of, sometimes being asked to hold students in a classroom for hours upon hours, and I wasn't prepared for that. I hated that feeling. So in the summer, after my first year teaching, I created a binder, and I organized the binder in tabs by standard. And so I would find, 10 to 15 activities. I know that's a lot of activities, but it was the summer. So I needed as many activities as I could. And actually that was the start. Having those activities was the start of me being able to differentiate for students too, because then I could kind of divvy away from just the core curriculum to help this student to do something. Sometimes you find like those mini projects, or again, I had time to kind of help my ideas that I had in my idea notebook come to fruition. I realized no one was going to build my teacher toolbox for me. There are times that schools will provide professional development for you.
Yes.
But sometimes, depending on where you are as an educator, that professional development means nothing. You may be past that point, or what they're teaching may have no relevance to you yet.
Yeah.
And so taking the time to really figure out what you need as an educator to grow yourself, that's kind of where I started. Just finding activities for myself, keeping that idea notebook, partnering up with the teacher. Sometimes things are caught and not taught. So sometimes I'm not sitting in a PD when I get something that's like, yes, that's what I'm going to do. Sometimes it comes from just a conversation with another educator like yourself to help me out. Like, I am adding that to my toolbox.
Yes. Yes. To make it easier for you.
Yeah.
And make your life work a whole lot better as a teacher.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give a teacher that is within their first 3 years, who's thinking, I may not be able to do this?
So the first thing I would say is to remember why you got into education in the first place. One thing I know my uncle had me do, I think I was in high school, was to write out my educational philosophy. So I would say just kind of go back to that. What is your philosophy on education? Because especially in today's times, real easy for that vision to get blurred with all of the things that you have to do and all of the negative. So if you're looking for someone to kind of help, just kind of pour into you, look for those master teachers who are positively growing and moving on, and partner up with them. And sometimes it is just asking the question, hey, will you be my mentor? Right. I need some help. Just keep an open mind. Remember that why you're there is to educate children. Keep them first. So when you're doing what's best for kids, you'll always come out winning, no matter what administration comes up with or what educational policy comes out next. As long as you're doing what's best for kids, some of that stuff won't even stick.
Teachers who have been teaching 7 years or more, they're at the point where I've seen this before, or we're changing once again, or they're adding one more thing. What would you tell master teachers or teachers who are coming into their mastery of teaching? What would you say to them?
I would say keep your vision in front of you. Again, the same thing that I would tell, a beginning teacher. Remember why you came here in the first place. Sometimes it does take you stepping back. I'll be very honest with you. I left education after my third year of teaching. I said, I'm done. I cannot do this anymore. And I went to be a stay-at-home mom. And I think that helped me, get perspective. That's my story. I'm not telling anyone to leave education. We need you more than anything. But that kind of helped give me a different mindset. So those teachers that are coming into their mastery, remember why you were here. And sometimes you spreading your love for education to someone else will help reignite that love and joy in the classroom that you had as a beginning teacher.
And how do you translate your love of education and learning to others?
it's just keeping that focus in front of me. Sometimes, I mean, you have to have that person that will allow you to vent and scream, but is also after you vent and scream going to say, okay, now that you've gotten that all out, now what? How are we going to solve the problem? Having people in your corner who are willing to speak truth to you. Sometimes we need people to just tell us, look, I know that he's on a second grade level and he's in the 7th grade, but your job is still to educate him, so just sometimes you just need that person that's like, I'm gonna let you cry, and you're done crying, good, so now let's get up and let's start over. So for me personally, I try to translate my love and education by continuing to grow myself, because if I'm not putting any good in, I have nothing good to give anyone else.
So true. That is so true. Candace, thank you so much for coming to speak with us at Friends Talking Education. And remember to remain RTL, ready to learn, love, and live life. Talk with you again soon, friend.